I suppose I will start by somewhat establishing the scene. Ben here, 26 years old, has spent several years with Lily, my wife. Just 3 months ago we were married, and I felt everything was going between us. Indeed, we experienced the typical ups and downs, that which comes with every relationship, but nothing unusual. That is at least what I thought. One evening, a normal evening that turned my world upside down, it all changed. Though I wasn't listening for anything, I managed to hear Lily on the phone. I heard her talking as I was strolling by our bedroom toward the kitchen. Her tone suggested an intimate, heartfelt conversation with someone she trusted. I couldn't even identify who she was talking to. I would have usually continued to walk, but suddenly I heard my name. I paused instinctively. After all, who wouldn't be fascinated if they heard their name in a private conversation? I stopped exactly in the hallway as she said, "Don't settle for just anyone. That's the mistake I made with Ben." I thought someone had punched me in the gut. She continued, almost as though she had no idea how powerful her comments could be. "He was my last resort, and now look where that's got me." Hearing that struck me like a ton of bricks. Totally stunned, I stood there trying to make sense of what I had just heard. I wanted to rush in right then and demand an explanation, but something held me back. My wife, the lady I thought was really pleased with me, was telling someone she had settled by being with me. Perhaps it was astonishment, perhaps fear, or perhaps a part of me hoping I had missed something. I thus turned to leave, but her words kept playing over and over in my mind, permeating every nook and cranny of my thinking all night. Last resort. Those words seemed to have burned into my head. Her feelings had been here for how long? Had I overlooked something right along? That whole night I lay awake, staring up at the ceiling and scrutinizing every aspect of our relationship. Though I looked for any explanation for what she had said, I couldn't turn it into anything it wasn't. Deep down, I understood what I had heard. There was no twisting that into anything else. I had never before seen any indicators of this. Lily was constantly satisfied, even delighted, or so I thought. Like any other relationship, we had our share of disagreements, but nothing made me believe she felt imprisoned or depressed. She had every chance to back out, so it was not as if she had been pushed into this marriage. Before we were married, we had spent some time together, discussed our future, and even fantasized about having children eventually, at least not to me. Lying there that evening, my mind whirled. Nothing ever felt forced or artificial. What if she had always felt this and had never spoken? If every moment we had, every "I love you" was simply her following the rules? Starting to feel like an idiot, I questioned whether I had been totally naive to her actual emotions. Then another prospect emerged, one I wanted not to consider but couldn't dismiss. Assuming someone else existed, what would happen? She'd said settling. What if that meant she'd had someone in mind all along? Someone she couldn't be with and was still thinking about? My stomach turned over at the idea of her evaluating me against another person. Though I didn't want to descend into a rabbit hole, once it started to occupy my thoughts, I couldn't get away from it. Morning arrived, and I was both physically and emotionally tired. Looking as happy as ever, she woke up as though nothing had changed. Though I attempted to be calm, every time I looked at her, I could hear her comments once more, louder every time. Though I was not ready, I felt I had to talk to her about what I had heard. I was paralyzed by her possible words. If she verified everything, what then? If she said she didn't love me, or worse, dismiss it as if it didn't matter? My nervousness just became worse during the day. I watched her every move, constantly dissecting every small action she took, searching for clues of the truth in the ordinary events of our lives. I came to see finally that I cannot keep this to myself indefinitely. The more I considered it, the more obvious it became. This was too large to overlook. But how would I raise it? What could I say at all? I attempted to act normal the following day, but it felt as though I had been living in some sort of dream, and now I was seeing everything through a fresh prism. Lily seemed to overlook anything different. She went around the house singing to herself, as though she had not unintentionally split my universe the evening before. She sat across the table from me, poured herself a cup of coffee, and grinned at me normally. Though I attempted to keep my expression blank, Every word she had spoken on that phone call came back to me. I continued looking at her, dissecting everything she did as we ate breakfast together. I found myself wondering whether she was considering the same things I was. She appeared, however, very happy, going through her phone like she often does. She even chuckled at something she observed, totally blind to the tempest inside me. Then she started typing rapidly on her phone out of nowhere, stopped, erased whatever she had written, and then resumed. My stomach started to churn a little as well. I tried to ask casually, "Who are you texting?" She looked up, startled, nearly as if I had shocked her out of some trance. She shruggingly remarked, "Oh, just a friend." Her tone was simply too laid back and too casual, which made me more uncomfortable. She returned to her phone, but I couldn't get rid of the impression that there was something more to this friend. I forced myself to act apathetic, nodding as though her response satisfied me. But starting forward, every second she spent on her phone made me feel as though I was being left in the dark. She texted the same friend from last night. Was she chatting to her once more about me? Alternatively, was she messaging another person completely? My head began to fly to all kinds of bad conclusions. I ran across her once more later that day, smiling at her laptop. When she came onto a hilarious meme or anything ridiculous on the internet, her typical chuckle was absent. This was more akin to personal, more unique. Something about the smile turned me inside, and I lost control not too long later. "What's so hilarious?" My voice sharpening more than I had intended, I asked. She locked her phone fast and looked up at me with nearly shame. "Oh, nothing." She brushed it off. "Just a meme." But she had a flutter of something she was attempting to hide in her eyes. My brain began whirling once more. She was chatting to someone she wanted me to know about, but not someone I wanted. Ex, perhaps? Someone she still loved? Though I disliked thinking this way, like a worried husband invading her company, I couldn't get the ideas out of my head. That evening we went through the motions, food, TV, some brief tiny conversation here and there. Still, the tension was really thick. She merely kept on, as like nothing was unusual. I knew she could feel it too. She even lay her head on my shoulder once while we watched TV. That would have usually made me feel close to her, safe. These days, though, it felt improper, like though we were acting in some sort of drama where we pretended everything was good. I couldn't keep back the questions racing through my head as I sat beside her. Did she truly say what she did about me? Was I only some backup plan for her, someone she selected since she cannot have what she really wanted? She had stated, "He was my last resort," over and over, and it wasn't only the words that stung, it was also how haversely she had delivered them. Not a second thought, not a clue she was exaggerating or mocking. By the end of the evening, I was both cognitively and emotionally worn out. It seemed like something she really believed. I could not continue to live like this, questioning every word, every glance, every little deed. Though I knew I had to face her at last, I was afraid of what I would find. What if she verified everything? If she just brushed it off, I would feel like a fool for even asking. I watched her go through her nightly ritual, brushing her teeth, pulling her hair back, getting into bed like it was any other night. Good night, turned over. She kissed me, then almost instantly fell asleep. Still, I lie there staring at the ceiling and have a racing mind. I began to consider every moment we had gone through, every time she seemed far off, every time I might have missed a warning. Had she not been really joyful all along, with hints? Events when she had emotionally withdrawn, but I would have dismissed it? Being someone's second choice, their last resort, stayed with me and would not go away no matter how much I tried. After hours of restless ideas, I at last realized I could not keep allowing this eat me alive. A few days passed in a fog, each one full of analysis and overthinking every contact with her. At last, I decided I was going to chat to her. I had to, just for my sanity. We were both at home one morning, seated opposite one another at the breakfast table. My heart seemed to be hammering out from my chest. I opened my mouth, but the words stayed caught in there. Every time I considered speaking, anxiety stopped me. Suppose I was merely seeing all of this. Suppose everything was just in my head. Still, the ideas persisted, and I knew I had to probe her about it. At last, After what felt like an age, I inhaled deeply and gazed directly at her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice quivering a little. She looked up from her phone, eyebrows slightly surprised. Her eyes gleamed with inquiry and a trace of worry. Needing some more room for what I was about to say, I signaled for us to go to the living room. We settled on the couch, and the nearly physical quiet between us was laden with unsaid tension. Another long breath, and at last I spoke. She nodded, her countenance serious now and giving me her whole attention. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her eyes stayed fixed, and I could sense she understood this was no idle chat. "A few nights ago I heard you on the phone," I said, hardly raising a murmur. Her eyes grew wide, and for a while it seemed as though time had stopped. "You said something about settling about me being your final resort." Her expression spoke to me everything. I knew she hadn't expected me to hear it. "Wait, you did indeed hear that?" she stammered, her voice unsteady. "Indeed," I said, trying to retain my cool. She looked down, fidgeting with her fingers, not meeting my eye. "I heard everything, Lily," she said. "Ben, I didn't mean it like that." At last, after what felt like eternity, I was merely chatting to a friend. She sounded almost contemptuous, as though it were no great issue. It was a dumb thing to say. "Stupid? You stated I was your final resort," I kept saying, getting frustrated within. "Lily, that is not only a dumb remark, that's crushing." She sighed, massaging her temples, obviously trying to come up with the appropriate words. "I was venting, right? It was not particularly serious." I shook my head, not buying it sometimes when you say things in the heat of the moment and they have no meaning. Events like those do not just happen overnight. You don't just tell someone you settled for your husband unless there's some truth behind it. She eventually looked up, her eyes mixed with remorse and frustration. "Ben, it is not like that. I was chatting about how everyone feels under pressure to get married and calm down. I was just ranting about life. But why say that about me? On us?" I pushed, my voice slightly raising. "You could have said anything else if it were only venting. Why must it center on me settling for?" Her eyes filled with tears. She turned aside, her speech hardly audible. I meant it differently than it sounded. Ben, darling, I am indeed. I wanted to believe her. God, I was simply stressed and it came out incorrectly. But something about it felt strange, as though she were hiding a truth beneath the surface. Perched on the couch, I absorbed her comments and tried to understand them. She explained she hadn't meant it the way it sounded, and she loved me. But something deep inside seemed improper. No matter how much I wanted to let her explanation untangle things, it felt as though a knot in my chest would not come free. I asked softly, observing her wipe her eyes, "Lily, do you really feel like you settled for me? Like your final resort, which I was?" She did not reply straight away. Rather, she turned her eyes down and twisted her fingers on her lap. The quiet between us continued, every moment like a year. At last, after what seemed like a lifetime, she said, "I don't know." Those 3 words really hit me like a gut reveler. As words reverberated in my thoughts, my heart dropped. "You don't know?" I asked, just managing to keep my voice steady. "What does that even mean?" Her voice quivering, she said, "It means, sometimes I feel unsure. Ben, it is not about you." Her comments hung in the air, heavy and raw. "I just feel like maybe I rushed into all this and now I'm not sure what to do." Though it lessened it, I could sense her uncertainty and anxiety. Leeching back, I felt as though the air had been knocked out of me. "So what now?" I asked, hardly able to put the words out there. "Where then is left for us?" Lily gently sniffed and wiped her eyes. Again, her voice almost audible. "I don't know. Ben, I never wanted to treat you badly. I felt I could make it work, but right now I'm not sure at all." We sat there in quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts and not sure what I actually want anymore. I had nowhere to say or knew how to improve this. Her words kept repeating in my head, "I don't know." It felt as though she had simply thrown a large question mark over our whole marriage, leaving me wondering if we had any basis at all. That day went by in a haze, the weight of our talk weighing down on me like tons of bricks. After that, we hardly spoke, each of us circling one another like ghosts. Every little thing felt weighty, as though we were treading eggshells. Even the most basic activities, like brushing by each other in the corridor, felt pressured and forced. Breakfast, I continued going back over her remarks, dissecting every exchange, searching for some indication of clarity, some clue that we might be able to correct this. The next morning, we seemed to be both on autopilot. We moved through our routine, but there was no actual connection. Lily kept staring at her phone every few minutes, typing rapidly, then deleting and retyping. She was very silent. I questioned whether it was someone else, or whether she was messaging that pal from the call I had listened in on. Too tired to inquire, I was. I lacked the enthusiasm for another chat that would most likely make me feel worse. The quiet was stifling by afternoon, and I could not stand it anymore. Hoping it would clear my thoughts, I told her I needed some air and headed for a walk, but the tempest in my head trailed me no matter how far I went. Every recollection, every incident that might have suggested this, I kept running across. Had there been indications of her uncertainty all through? Had I simply turned away from the truth, ignorant? Being someone's second choice, the person I chose, weighed heavily on me. When I returned, Lily was seated in the same location on the couch, still fixated on her phone. I snapped something inside of me. I could not hold this bottled up. I had been trying to keep it together, but the longer I let this go untreated, the worse it was eating away at me. "We need to figure this out, Lily," I said, my voice harder than I meant. She looked up, shocked, set her phone down. "We cannot keep pretending everything is fine," she murmured gently. "I know," her voice hardly a whisper. Unable to hide the irritation in my voice, I continued, I don't know where to start. Start by being honest with me. Do you even want to be married? Right now it seems like you've already checked out." She bit her lip and turned away as if unable to meet my eye. Her voice was shaking. "Ben, I don't want to hurt you," she started, "but I feel so lost. I felt getting married would provide me security and help me to see things more clearly. But now it's like I'm discovering how unsure I truly am." Her comments felt like a slap in the face, but I knew I needed to hear this. "So what then are you saying?" My voice was just a whisper. I asked, "Do you wish to go out?" Again, she said those 3 words ringing in my ears. "I don't know. I simply have time." "Time," I said again, feeling the weight of that word sink over me. "Lily, time isn't going to fix this. We either are not together or we are. Sitting around waiting is not going to help anything to be clearer." She turned away, tears welling up. She said gently, "I don't know what you want me to say, Ben." "I am terrified." I groaned, running a hand through my hair, trying to find some way to contact her. I don't want to make the wrong decision, but I also doubt if I made the correct one. "And then what about Lily?" My voice was as raw as I asked, "Do you suppose I find this easy?" Her head shot up, her expression a mix of hurt and wrath as I sat here wondering if you ever truly loved me, or if I was simply the man you settled for because you didn't want alone. With a trembling voice, "That's not fair, Ben," she said. "I really do love you." I hurried into this, assuming that would be sufficient. "Then why not you say something before we got married? I thought I could make it work, but now I'm realizing maybe I was mistaken. Feeling the resentment spilling over, I asked, "You had every chance to call it off if you weren't sure," she said, her voice faltering. "Because I didn't want to disappoint you," she said. "I wanted company not only for myself." There it was, the truth I had been fearing but partially expected, and I realized I could make it work. Now I doubt. Married me out of fear rather than love, anxiety of being alone oneself, anxiety of disappointing someone. Now we were both paying for it. Unable to look at each other, we sat in quiet, both engrossed in our thoughts. I knew nothing to say or how to understand this. She had essentially told me she wasn't sure whether she wanted to be with me, that perhaps I was simply the easy choice. The awareness was crushing, like the ground had been taken from under me. She finally spoke, her voice barely audible above a whisper. Not meeting my eyes, she replied, Maybe Maybe we need some space. Just for a little bit to consider things. Space? I nodded, nearly gasping at the irony. Lily, although we have been sharing the same house, we already feel rather apart. How different would more space make? She had no response. Honestly, neither did I. We were caught in this weird land where neither of us understood what to do or how to progress. We went to bed that night as normal, but it felt like we lived miles away. Laying there, I gazed at the ceiling and questioned whether there was any way to undo this or if this marked the start of the end. I kept thinking about her words. I don't. All night. That was all she could provide, a never-ending thread of I don't know that left me feeling more bewildered and doubtful than ever. The thought that this may be the end and that nothing we determined would never be the same again tormented me. Though I still didn't completely comprehend it yet, the next morning I woke up with a kind of resolution, as if a decision had been taken someplace deep inside me. Curled on her side, Lily was still asleep. Her face was calm, even innocent. It dawned on me that perhaps for her, not as weighty or consuming as they were for me. Perhaps she had already begun to float away without noticing it, and I was left clutching something that was falling through my hands. Quietly getting up, I headed to the living room. Sitting there, I began to consider how my life would turn out without Lily in it. Before, I never gave it any thought. Though the prospect was horrifying, the more I considered it, the more I realized I was already living in terror. Fear of being alone, fear of losing her, fear of confronting whatever lied on the other side of our marriage. Still, what was worse? Being alone or someone's last resort? I lost the day organizing my ideas and trying to decide what I wanted to convey. I knew this could not last much more. The weight of all those I don't know was intolerable. We could not spend eternity floating in this in-between area. By nighttime, I experienced an unusual peace. I was ready for a serious talk, one free of half-hearted pledges or evasive responses. I knew I couldn't get clarity on my alone, and I needed it. I sat her down after supper, my heart racing, but my voice was steady. Lily, we have to talk. She looked up from her phone, her face turning grave right away. She knew this was not simply another lecture. I inhaled deeply, attempting to control my voice. I have been thinking a lot, I said, keeping a consistent tone. About us. Regarding almost everything that has transpired. Not knowing if we are headed forward or if we are merely passing through the motions. I cannot continue to live like this. She nodded slowly and looked down at her hands, but she said nothing. She hesitated, her fingers plucking at the edge of her sweater. I need to know if we're going to work on this together or if it's time to let go and move on. She murmured gently, her voice almost above a whisper. I've been thinking too. I nodded, bracing myself for the next set of words. And I don't think I can give you the answer you're looking for. My voice quivering slightly. Then I think it's best if we go our separate ways. I love you, Lily, but I cannot be in a marriage in which I am not the first option for someone. I am deserving of more than that. Her expression crumpled as tears started to flow down her cheeks. I felt, for a split second, the worst person on the planet. Still, deep down I felt this was the correct choice. Maintaining a relationship out of guilt or fear was unfair to either of us. Whispering through her sobs, I never wanted to hurt you. I made a quite big error. Though I now understand how mistaken I was, I felt a twinge of sadness but also a weird sort of serenity. I thought I wanted something different. I know, I answered softly, and I also wish not to offend you. Sometimes, though, the best thing we can do for one another is to let go. We sat silently, both of us working through what was happening. It was weird, as though I were seeing someone else's life fall apart before me. However, this was my life, and I had to own the decisions we had both taken. The next several days were not great. We began the process of sorting our lives, determining who would retain what and how we would manage the logistics of separating from one another. Though it was uncomfortable and difficult, every stride seemed to be relieving some of my weight. Though difficult, It seemed like the only practical route forward. Lily softly entered the room one evening while I was organizing some of my belongings. "Ben," she murmured, her tone tinged with a melancholy I had not heard before. "I want you come across someone that brings you pleasure, someone who could offer you what you are due." I glanced at her, my chest constricting. I said, the words hardly making it out, "I hope you find that too." And with that, it was done. There are no long speeches or theatrical goodbyes. Rather, there is a quiet knowledge that occasionally love is insufficient and it is acceptable to let go. I dropped myself into reconstructing my life once she moved out. I poured myself into work, got back in touch with people I hadn't seen in a while, and began to define me outside of our relationship. Some days the agony would strike me suddenly, acute and unannounced. It would feel like a knife in my chest, as I would see an old picture or recall a joyful experience. Still, I persisted one step at a time, understanding that this suffering was a necessary component of recovery. One day then, I was catching up over a few beers with a buddy. We were laughing, talking about everything and nothing, when he stopped suddenly, like he was preparing himself to tell me something he didn't want to say. "Hey, did you find out Lily is seeing someone?" His voice wary, as if he were worried about my response. The words sank in second nature. My heart sank and my chest was constricted. "Already?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Yeah," he answered, appearing uneasy. "I seen her with some guy other day. They appeared close. I tried to act apathetic, but inside I felt as though my heart was ringing in on itself." "Do you know his name?" Keeping my voice as laid back as possible, I asked. Hesitating, he continued, "I think it's that person she used to talk about before you two got married. You know, the one she knew had some history." And then everything came together. Her continuous texting, the way she had been hooked to her phone in the previous 2 weeks, brushing off my inquiries, all about him. She had not just been far, she had already moved on in her head long before our farewells. After that, I said little except nodded and switched the topic. Internally, though, I felt like I was blazing. She had every right to do what she wanted right now, but the timing hurt. She was not dating someone else. It made me feel as though our marriage had been a farce, as if she had one foot out the door all the time. That evening, I found myself unable to relax. Every minute of our last month together, every time she had been on her phone, every time she had brushed me off, I kept running back over it. All of it now makes sense. She had been checked out, already preoccupied with someone else, not merely distant. I could not control myself the next morning. I needed closure, a response from her to at last put things to rest. I asked if we might chat in a note to her. She agreed. Later that day we went to a park. Seeing her once more seemed unusual, like staring at someone I used to know but who had grown weirder. She seemed anxious, as though she understood what was ahead. Keeping my voice level, I said, "Lily, I need you to be honest with me." And she nodded, her eyes steady but anxious. Watching her closely, I continued, "I heard you're seeing someone. Is that true?" Her eyes grew wide momentarily, then softened as she turned aside. "Yeah," she said softly. "I've been seeing someone. Is it the same guy you were talking to before we separated?" Already knowing the answer, I asked her but wanted to hear it from her. She hesitated, then nodded, guilt-ridden on her face. "Yes, it's him." I experienced an all-at-once burst of fury, grief, everything. "So the whole time you were chatting to him?" My voice strained as I asked. "Even in the middle of our still learning process?" She gazed down. Her words were just a whisper. Tears running down her cheek, she continued, "I didn't plan for it to happen this way." I inhaled deeply, trying to fight back the tempest inside me. "Lily, we were still married. We started conversing again, and it simply felt natural. We were supposed to be working on us, and you were already moving on with someone else." "I'm so sorry, Ben," she said, her voice tinged with guilt. Hearing her say that made me not feel any better. I never intended to hurt you. If anything, it got me more irate. "Why didn't you simply tell me if you were chatting to him all along?" I asked. "Why should we drag this out?" Guilt weighing heavily in her eyes, she stared at me. I shivered. I had no idea how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I replied angrily, getting up. You managed to do that anyhow. We stood silently, neither of us sure what to say. For pulling me along while she already had one foot out the door, I wanted to scream and rail at her for being selfish. Still, I knew it wouldn't make anything different. Damage was done. There was no going back. At last, I gazed at her, my voice icy. I hope he is worth it. She tried to say something, her face wrinkling, but I cut her off. I hope you're satisfied with him. Just finish the divorce paperwork, I said. Let's be done with this, I said, and I turned away, experiencing an odd mix of relief and grief. It was quite over. Lily's chapter concluded at last, and although it hurt, I knew that by letting go, I had done the right thing. I concentrated on reconstructing the bits of my life in the next few weeks. Being alone at first seemed unusual. Though I knew it was time to start anew, every room in the house brought up Lily and the life we had aimed for. I began to get more active, reconnecting with people and trying to get back on my feet. Some days were more difficult than others. There were times when I woke up and felt the weight of everything we had lost, recollections that simultaneously felt both healing and terrible. But the hurt grew less raw day by day. Right after I started to recover, Lily sent me a note. I had removed her contact, but I knew it was her the instant her name showed on my computer. I debated whether to open the book or just leave it there while I gazed at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore her and keep ahead without turning around. But another side, that which had loved her and still yearned for answers, felt obliged to hear what she had to say. The brief and mysterious message was, "Can we talk? It's crucial." I felt a flood of emotions, anger, curiosity, and a little unwelcome flutter of hope I couldn't quite ignore. Against better sense, I consented to see her. We set aside a tiny coffee shop in town as a neutral venue where we might both feel some distance from all that had transpired. She was already there when I arrived, not at all like the confident person I had known. Her red and puffy eyes matched her lack of sleep over several days. When I entered, she looked up and gave me a meager smile that hardly made eye contact. Still, I showed no pity. I could only consider how badly she had damaged me and how resolved I was not to let her back into my life. She started, "Ben," her voice faltering. "I knew I was probably the last person you wanted to hear from, but I had to tell you something." I folded my arms and leaned back, keeping my expression as neutral as I could manage. "What is it, Lily?" She drew a long breath, her eyes welling once more. "The person I was seeing cheated on me. Blinking, startled, he was seeing someone else the whole time we were together. That was not what I expected. I said nothing for a time. I simply let her comments sink in." She peered down, obviously trying to keep it together. "I learned a few days ago," she said, her voice faltering. When I approached him, he hardly tried to refute it. He simply admitted it as though it didn't really matter. "I feel so, Ben. Like a fool." She started to cry and covered her face with her hands, leaving you for someone who hardly gave me any thought. Sitting there, I watched her and experienced an odd mix of apathy and gratitude. This was basic karma, straightforward. She had betrayed me, left our marriage for someone else, and today she was suffering with the fallout. She said, "I'm so sorry." Her hands covered her voice. "I made a quite big error. Though I now see how mistaken I was, I believed I wanted something different. I had to tell you. I don't expect you to forgive me." I waited a bit, let her cry, then at last spoke. I kept my voice steady and controlled, even as I felt the bitterness building in my throat. "Lily, I appreciate you telling me the truth, but it doesn't change anything." She raised her eyes, begging, "Ben, at least let's try to correct things. Now I see that you were the best thing that has ever come across me. I still love you." I shook my head slowly and felt a weird release as I spoke. "Lily, you did not love me. The thought of not being by yourself appealed to you, and you rushed to someone else when things got bad." She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand, but I jerked away, keeping my voice strong. "I cannot be with someone who only comes back after things break apart with another." Tears flooding her face, she begged, "Please, Ben, give me one more opportunity." Feeling lighter than I have in months, I got up and started to put everything right. Lily, it is too late. You have to move on as well. I have done. Her face crumpled, and I could see the weight of her regret in her eyes. I deserve someone who chooses me first, not someone who settles or comes back when things go south elsewhere. I was not sorry for her, though. She had to live with her filth here. One last time I glanced at her, my voice quieter but firm. Lily, I'm sorry, but we're done. I left her crying behind the coffee shop. I felt as though a weight had been taken off my shoulders for the first time since all had happened. At last, I closed the door on that chapter of my life and was ready to advance. The next several weeks were distinct. Like I had been carrying something heavy and had at last laid down, I could breathe once more. Indeed, there were days when I thought of her when memories would flood back and cause my chest discomfort. Now, though, I saw I had chosen wisely. I would establish a barrier that respected my own value and pleasure. A few weeks later, one night, I was looking through old pictures on my phone. I stumbled upon a photo of us from the early years, back when we were both carefree, happy, in love. I briefly experienced remorse and a flutter of melancholy for all we had lost. Then I thought of the suffering, the treachery, and all I had learnt throughout the road, and I came to see something crucial. Occasionally, love is insufficient. Often the only way to create space for something better is to let go. I have no idea what happens next, still learning, still healing, still finding my path. Nonetheless, I am hopeful for the first time in a long period. I know I belong with someone who loves me without second thought or doubt, someone who is first pick. I am also ready to wait until I meet that individual. Though difficult, moving forth is essential. And one thing was clear as I started those initial steps into whatever my future contained. I was at last free. Free to rebuild my life, free to be my own person, and free to locate the kind of love that doesn't leave me feeling like anyone's last resort.